Is it time for you to start getting hyped for the war within? Should you return in the war within? Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to each and every one of you. My name, of course, is Akulon, and in today's video, that is the specific question we're seeking to answer. If you are one of the players that sort of just got burnt out with World of Warcraft, you've been playing it for a very long time. You really enjoyed it way back in the day. Your favorite expansion was Wrath of the Lich King. And ever since then, you've kind of just been looking for that magic again. The answer to this question is a pretty simple, probably not. You're burnt out, you're no longer enjoying the game, and really there is nothing that the developers of World of Warcraft can do to bring you back into the game. If your reasons for quitting was gameplay, I'm not entirely sure what to tell you. The fact of the matter is, there are some really cool things coming in the War Within from a gameplay perspective, like, for example, the Delve system. That's the new Evergreen system. We haven't checked it out yet. We don't know exactly what it's going to entail, but it sounds like a pretty cool system. It sounds like very much lessons learned from things like the Mage Tower, lessons learned from things like Torghast, now being implemented into the game as an Evergreen feature, which I think can be really cool from a gameplay perspective. You also now have the alt warband system that I think is going to go a very long way to making the game a lot more fun on things like alts. The problem is, Dragonflight was incredible from a gameplay perspective. It was such a step up from things like Battle for Azeroth and things like Shadowlands. It removed a lot of the unnecessary, needless carrot stick grind mechanics. I don't know what the hell that sound was. But it removed all of that, and instead, the game really respected your time. You could play whenever the hell you wanted, and a lot of people played a lot more than what they necessarily wanted. So if you quit because of gameplay reasons, I don't know what to tell you. The group that I want to talk to, the people that I really want to hone in and focus on here, are the people that quit because of the story. The people that said, I can't deal with this. Now, you can fall on like anywhere on the spectrum. If you're one of the players that absolutely loved Dragonflight's story and you thought that it was just absolutely masterfully done, that's great. You're not wrong, because story and the enjoyment of story is an incredibly subjective thing. One story can be shown to 10 different people and you can get 5 different experiences from those 10 different people. So it's an incredibly subjective thing. From an objective standpoint, we can rank or rate a story and say whether or not it was a well-told story. I am on record, and I will continue to maintain this. Dragonflight, in many ways, had some really well-told stories, but it also had some questionable stories, to say the very, very least. In many ways, the main story was the most questionable, where all of the other stories, like all of the side stories, were actually pretty well done. So it's sort of like a weird dichotomy of just not entirely sure how things played out the way that they did. And I think I have reasons for that. I think I understand why that is. So today, I'm going to examine what the future of World of Warcraft looks like, the story thereof, and why Dragonflight looked maybe a little disjointed. For those of you that may be thinking, I really want to get back. I miss Azeroth. Man, I can't do another Power of Friendship expansion. Now, I'm going to start off by first asking, what's changed? What is there that you can look forward to in the War Within that isn't in Dragonflight? And the first thing that stands out is that Mason magic. Everyone knows Chris Mason. Everyone lost their minds when he got onto stage and he did his classic El Clasico call out to all of the players, and everyone's like, ah, fuck yeah, it's Chris Mason, let's go, bro. He is a dude that we know from World of Warcraft because he was the guy that wrote the original World of Warcraft, and he's back. But how much involvement did he have in Dragonflight? The answer is very minimal. He came back around about the start of Dragonflight, but he came back as a consultant. He was consulting on the story. And it wouldn't be until a year and a half later that it would finally become official. Chris Mason would now be back, but he would basically be the creative lead of the Warcraft IP no longer a writer or just a writer or a writer for all of the franchises in Blizzard, but World of Warcraft or Warcraft specifically, that is now his baby. And I think that may be one of the reasons why a lot of the main story in Dragonflight was a little bit disjointed. When we look at the side stories for World of Warcraft Dragonflight, most of those side stories deal with conclusions of very old storylines. The Blue Dragonflight, for example, they saw a conclusion, and it was all about allowing the Blue Dragons to find themselves, to find their history, to make peace with their history, and then find their place in the future. The Black Dragon storyline, pretty similar. It was about finding their place, being okay with the things that happen in their history, and then finding a way forward into the future. The Bronze Dragonflight, very similar. And then also the Tyr storyline. It had to do with basically bringing Tyr back, but also in answering a lot of the questions around Tyr's death, around Tyr's movement, and the knights and the paladins that follow in Tyr's footsteps. So all of these stories were pretty unimpactful to the future of the story of World of Warcraft. The Blue Dragons was always going to be part of the story of World of Warcraft, so how that ended would pretty much always have been, yep, the Blue Dragons are back. If you compare that to the main storyline, one thing starts to stand out with the main storyline, at least from my perspective, that I think really hampered the quality of a lot of the storytelling in Dragonflight. And that is that a lot of the stories in the main storyline specifically did not earn the emotional height that it wanted to achieve with its finales. The moment, the big moment that would arrive, wasn't earned. It was there, and Blizzard really, you could see what Blizzard was trying to go for, but in that ending, you just sort of looked and said, yeah, I don't feel like this massive emotional connection here. I wonder why that is. And to my mind, one of the key things that stands out is changes in the writing from the consultancy side. We were all told that Steve Denuser was the main guy behind Dragonflight, and that is true. By the time Chris Mason joined the team as a consultant, the story of Dragonflight was already well and truly written. There was very little that could be made in terms of changes for the overall story. Now, when you do a rewrite, that's a lot of rushing around trying to get that rewrite to work, and you simply don't have the resources to do massive rewrites in a very convincing way. And when you look at stories like Viranoth, going from absolutely despising Alexstrasza, hating Alexstrasza for what was done to the baby dragons, then having a single conversation with her brother, and then suddenly realizing, well, never mind, I guess I will be joining the dragons after all, fighting against my brothers. A lot of people think that they can defend that and think that they can come up with some kind of defense that makes sense of that. But I will take you back to the original conversation between Viranoth and Alexstrasza, where Alexstrasza tells Viranoth to her face, Iridikron has struck bargains with terrible powers. What Iridikron is seeking isn't just the freedom of dragons. Iridikron is seeking the end of life on Azeroth. If Iridikron wins and the forces that he's backing actually achieves victory, it's the end of all life on Azeroth. And from Viranoth's perspective, she tells Alexstrasza straightforward, this is war. It's vengeance. I no longer care about the preservation of life. And then suddenly, at the drop of a pen, she changes her mind and returns to Alexstrasza. Now, there are ways in which you could have done that story. There are ways in which that story would have worked really, really well. But that wasn't it. You needed a lot more time and a lot more resources in order to make that story make logical sense to the player. Now, we can headcanon this, and I can give you a full-blown headcanon reason for why Viranoth ultimately came back to Alexstrasza and what Viranoth wanted to do. But that's headcanon. that's not the actual canonical lore. And for a story to actually be well written, it requires the in-game canonical writings that leads the viewer to understanding the actions that is taken by the characters. And in this instance, that is not in the story. What could explain that? A rewrite. I have every belief that Veranoth was supposed to die in the final raid, or that she was supposed to feature in the final raid, escape, and that she would have been, along with the Ridicron, an enemy at the end of the next expansion, or even the expansion after that. Because Veranoth is a really cool villain, Ice Cold, Queen of Ice, it sort of writes itself. But then Metzen came in. And Metzen, as the consultant, knowing now that he is working on the next expansions for World of Warcraft, he came to the newser and he was like, oh, dude, we kind of need Veranoth alive, and we also kind of need her not to be a villain. And now you get a massive rewrite. The problem is, most of your quest designers are already working on the next expansion. Most of your quest designers don't have the time or the resources to create massive quest lines in order to bring the story to Veranoth is now part of the allies, right? So you do a quick and dirty rewrite, and you hope that players headcanon their way through it and they accept it. When you think about it that way, that story actually makes a lot of sense. And it's not the only one of its kind. There are many stories, including the one with Malfurion and Ysera, where it almost feels like Ysera was truly meant to have a much larger story in the overall expansion. But the story that the Newser wanted to have for Ysera wasn't the story that Chris Metzen wanted, because Chris Metzen had a different vision and plan for the future of World of Warcraft. And it almost feels like Malfurion coming back was exactly that, because Malfurion's return doesn't earn the incredible emotional impact that it seeks to have. Unless you're, if you're a massive Night Elf fan and you're a massive Malfurion and Tyrande fan, I can see it. But the fact of the matter is, in order to have that make sense, you would have needed scenes with Tyrande breaking down, telling Chandris, I miss your father. I need Malfurion. He always knows what to do in these situations. You needed to see her suffer without him in order to understand the weight of him finally coming back and being that pillar of strength that Tyrande needs in her life. That would have helped to set up that scene a lot better. Except if the scene is dirtily rewritten because, well, Chris Metzen wants Malfurion in the next expansion, this is the best you can do. Let's get into why I think Chris Metzen moving the chess pieces on the chessboard around is something that you should be very, very excited for. If we took a step back from Dragonflight and we said, right, what is it that Dragonflight ultimately tried to do? I will take away the following. Dragonflight removed or buried a lot of the old heroes, not by killing them, but by moving them off the chessboard for a while. Gain Greymane, Malfurion, and Tyrande. You have a lot of the old guard sort of taking a step back on the chessboard. And it introduced a number of new heroes in its place. But the old heroes are still there to be guidance and to be used when in doubt and when in need to really great effect. Bringing these new heroes through really allows Blizzard to set up the heroes for the next 20 years of World of Warcraft, because we already know that is how far ahead they're thinking. They're setting it up for the next 15 years, and for new heroes to work, you kind of need old heroes to bring these new heroes to the player base and allow the player base to connect with your new heroes. And that is exactly what we have here. Chandris and her mother and her father, she can now be the leader of the Night Elves, but you can have Tyrande and Malfurion accompany her on that adventure and allow the player base to fall in love with Chandris as a result of these old heroes that they already have relationships with. Gain Greymane and his daughter, the same thing. Bolvar and his daughter, exactly the same thing. The expansion really is setting up a number of incredible future heroes for the move into the next few expansions. From a villain side, the expansion did a phenomenal job, because not only had the expansion set up Iridikron as arguably one of the best introduced villains in a very long time in World of Warcraft, but we know that Xal'atath is coming back. And Xal'atath has been a quiet little gnawing at the back of our minds ever since Battle for Azeroth, really. We know that Illidan and Sargeras most likely poised to be making a comeback in the next few expansions. These are a lot of villains, just sort of on the side waiting to make a return. We have the decay in Dragonflight that was never actually touched on. That whole area with the gnolls and the decay there, that's never been touched on. That's a future villain or something of the future that is just waiting to happen, right? We have the Tower of Ice that stands also in Dragonflight that hasn't actually been touched on, but that will make quite a big story. We have the Infinites that's coming back. We have Tyr's story that's coming back, most likely in the next expansions. We have the Light setting themselves up in the War Within to be a pretty big, big contributor to the overall story. Fundamentally, the War Within is, at least from the off, setting itself up as a pretty dangerous and dark 3 expansions. Expansions with a lot of war, expansions with a lot of death, and expansions with a lot of dark themes, as we have all known and loved Chris Metzen, because that is his way. Fundamentally, should you come back for the War Within? Yes. I believe you should. But ultimately, I would like to know from you, if you are one of those players that quit World of Warcraft because you just didn't like the story, how are you feeling about the War Within? Is this an expansion that you are looking forward to, or are you going to give it a skip and move on to the next one? Let me know in the comment section down below. Ladies and gentlemen, for $1 a month over on Patreon, you too can keep this channel free from sponsorships that want to take up time in the video that you could be spending just listening to my sultry voice telling you shit about the lore of World of Warcraft. $1 a month, that's Patreon. Links in the description down below. Ladies and gentlemen, as always, be kind to each other, be good to each other, and I will see all of you in the next one. Peace!